Hi there, welcome. My name's Aaron Wilder, and I curated the Amos Eno Gallery exhibition on Artsy, Unstable Language. And joining me is one of the great participating artists, Christopher Squier. Christopher, thank you so much for being with me. Your work investigates the literal and conceptual role of optics, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how and when that started, and if there was a particular impetus.
I think for me, this whole inquiry around optics and perception and vision initially came about as part of a question of politics and art, and happened around the time I was working towards my graduate final exhibition at the San Francisco Art Institute. This was 2015. It's about when you and I met, and I had, as one of my projects, I became really interested in satellite imagery's role in uncovering human rights abuses. And at the time, there was a London-based research group, Forensic Architecture, that had been doing a lot of work with that. And I was also interested in how that technology could not just uncover, but could conceal abuses of human rights. And so this was the time that there was a lot going on in terms of journalism around black sites. This was sort of post-Guantanamo, and the
Hmm.
US military was using extraordinary rendition methods. So this was kind of extrajudicial, outside the law detainment and interrogating and torturing so-called enemy combatants. And it was happening out in international waters outside of the domestic territory. And so it was this kind of broad, unregulated swath of a seascape where military ships at sea were undeclared, inaccessible to the press and the public, were supposedly had combatants out on site, and it was very difficult to understand what was going on. So I was interested, as an artist, of course, in visualizing what was going on and trying to take a look at that more closely, both the site of the international waters and the ocean, and that demarcation between our national rights, civil rights, and so on, and the place where people became rightless. And so this kind of murky position and its idea of like, how do we document that was interesting to me. And I ended up doing quite a bit of research on how satellite communications and regulations worked. And it turns out that because of privacy laws, footage that comes from, a satellite can only go to a certain resolution. And that's the size, the pixel size has to be larger than the size of a person viewed from above. So you can't resolve any facial features. You can't have identifying information in the public realm about people. And in a way, I thought that was similar to older technologies from photography, where long exposure times would cause figures moving through the scene to disappear. And it also created a sense of this, depopulated landscape where if something was happening, it didn't appear. It was really an emphasis on the landscape itself or the built environment, without the human element. So I was in response, I went into various databases that were publicly accessible for imagery of the ocean, of international waters, and looked around. And there's some interesting things, but mostly you would see it's a very pixelated landscape, very pixelated waves moving. Occasionally you'd see different colors where different satellite images were stitched together, or you might see a boat cut in half, or kind of some artifacts of the system. But overall, it was most things were kind of unclear, unresolved. There wasn't much to see. Um, and you can see images here of some of what that imagery looked like at that point in time. And, this technology has developed a lot. At that point, it was very much in its nascent stage. Um, but so for me to think about optics and to think about the technology of different lenses capturing images of the world, um, it was interesting to see how this space that was being reported in one way was being visualized in a completely different way. And you could look through and see that you could basically see no evidence of the human rights abuses there. So as an artist, I decided to focus on the absence of those instead. And what I did, actually, if you go to the next slide, I printed an image of this internet, like a stretch of international waters that was located right outside of San Francisco. It's at 12 miles to the international waters boundary. And so this was from 13 miles outside of San Francisco. I printed it on a sheet of canvas and I built a little raft for it. And I ended up showing it for the final show in between the piers at Fort Mason, which is its own kind of strange gray zone as a government site and a state recreational park and part of San Francisco proper. So you have all these overlapping authorities, but then I brought this international piece of international waters in so you could see it in contrast to the actual water. Um, and I think what was particularly interesting about that is that the image, which is supposed to be data rich and very like high tech, um, doesn't reveal anything. And meanwhile, the water itself has all of these sensory components. You're out on the water in the fog, it's cold, there's wind, you hear the seagulls, and you can feel the spray. And it's a much more full experience. So I was kind of interested in that question between what is recorded and what is an experience outside of the data.
Yeah, and the work that is in the show relates to a protest movement in Russia from the 2010s. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you first became aware of that movement and the work of Artyom Luskutov and the May Day Parade.
Let's see. So the work that's in the exhibition is called The Sun is Your Enemy, and it's from a series that I titled Monstratsia Archive, which consists of absurdist protest slogans stenciled onto sheets of glass. And these were found text that I translated from Russian into English and then stenciled. And I started making that work while I was working towards a solo exhibition at RSF Projects that became kind of a sweeping look at the different aspects of optics and kind of thinking about maybe the history, the geopolitics of vision through different case studies. So I made works looking at, so many things, like the mineral composition of stardust and Cold War physics textbooks and lighthouse lenses. Um, and it was very much like a laboratory for me to explore different ideas. And it was a really wonderful, liberating experience working with the curatorial team because they gave me full reign to kind of bring together the different projects in one space. And so this was about 2017 or 2018. And I had previously spent a summer in St. Petersburg in Russia and volunteering at the Hermitage Museum. And I'd gone back to study Soviet literature in Moscow for a couple weeks. Um, and it was a very different time in Russia. There was still a lot of political hope, and there was an opportunity for dissent and for free speech. And there was an idea that the system could become more democratic again. And um, and so I'd been following what was going on for a while. And these movements were the signs in these parades were um, circulating on the internet, I guess. It was kind of a viral movement um, that would happen each year on May Day during the May Day parades. And yeah, so it ran through the 2010s. It started just a little bit before that. It got shut down eventually. They had their right to demonstrate revoked. But at the beginning, it was put together by a performance artist whose name is Artyom Loskutov. And it started in Novosibirsk and then it spread to other cities around Russia. And as you can kind of see here, it has a kind of lighthearted quality. It's more humorous, it's absurdist. The term monstratsia, which is what they would call the marches also, comes from demonstratsia or demonstration, but without the prefix, which was seen as kind of a negative prefix. So it was to make this more positive. It also, for me, chimes a little bit with like the demonstration, the demonized, the monstratsia, the monstrous. So there's some interesting, maybe linguistic correlations there that speak to what's going on with power and with protest. But for me, what was really interesting and what was disarming about the marches and turned them into such a phenomenon on the internet was how kind of joyful and creative and humorous the nonsensical protest signs were. So as a few examples, let's see, forward to a dark past, or Tanya, don't cry, raccoons are people too, or what are your plans for eternity? Um, and then The Sun is Your Enemy, which became the title for my show and is the title of this piece as well.
So I want to thank you, Christopher, for taking the time to speak with me and for participating in the show. I want to remind everyone that Unstable Language is on artsy.net through December 1st.